Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. We like to pride ourselves on the podcast for staying ahead of the curve on the topics that matter to 905ers and Ontarians at large. We've been discussing planning and housing affordability long before this summer made it the it issue of Canada. Right now, it seems that everyone at every level of power in Canada is talking about getting housing done right. Chances are your mayor is talking about it. Doug Ford is talking about it. Pierre Poilievre is talking about it. And Justin Trudeau is talking about it. All of the power brokers are talking about what policies and taxes they are going to levy or axe to spur the boom of housing construction we are going to need over the next 10 years to finally tackle this crisis once and for all. While freeing up bureaucracy and red tape, as well as HST on new builds are all well and good from a policy analyst's point of view, the question we haven't heard answered is, who's going to be doing the building? The one aspect of the housing crisis which has seemed to fall into the background is perhaps the most important one to consider. Our huge gap in skilled trade labor in the workforce. As more and more carpenters, electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, and just about everyone else who goes into building our homes retire, we are not replacing them at a suitable rate. For years, we have heard that there are just not enough skilled workers to meet the demand of the market, which made us ask the question, just how bad is it out there? To answer that, we invited onto the podcast Craig Brockwell. Craig is a former tech teacher in the Ontario high school system. He has studied architecture and is a carpenter by trade. He has worked in government relations for the Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, as well as Support Ontario Youth, a not-for-profit which works to encourage young people in Ontario to get into the trades. For much of his career, Craig has advocated for greater focus on the trades and how to get more young people to take a career in the trades more seriously. He is also critical of the lack of focus this important aspect of the housing crisis has received from our elected officials. Today, Craig joins us to discuss how bad the gap in the skilled trades is at this moment and how our education system can do better to fill that gap.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.
Okay, thank you to Craig Brockwell for coming onto the podcast today to talk something about the housing crisis, but this is an angle that we think has not been addressed really in much depth in any of the media to date, and that is the black hole of skilled trades laborers that are going to build these houses that we're going to need for the next 10 years. Craig, thank you very much for coming on to the 905er today.
I appreciate it. As you said, an element of the I call it the skills trades crisis, but the housing crisis that actually, as you said, has been overlooked. So I'm pleased that you're taking it on.
So give us a sense of what the problem is right now, because we're hearing about, we need to build, and I don't think anybody's refuting that fact. But we had a Twitter conversation, and you brought up a good point that basically who's going to do the building. And can you give our listeners a bit of a sense of how big of a gap is that between the reality on the ground and what we hope is going to happen in 10 years?
So I started teaching in 1985-86. There was a skills trades gap back then. It exists today. It's probably been exacerbated hasn't been solved in the last whatever number of years. I'll look at it so that's a sort of a historical approach that it's always been around, at least as long as I've been teaching or been in government relations work. In the last number of years, a number of reports by various organizations, RBC, Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, any number of them, all indicate the same thing. Over the next 5 to 6 years, close to 1 million journey persons will be retiring. And if I look across North America, because the US and other countries have the same challenge, for every 5 journey persons that are retiring, 2 are coming in as apprentices. So obviously it's a huge gap when we project that. And it goes across all trades. So pretty substantial. And again, fully vetted and fully reported by any number of reports.
Now we keep hearing from our provincial government, they want to tote on the importance of skilled trades. Like that theme is not exclusive, I think, to Doug Ford or the Ontario PC government, although they have really kind of doubled down on it in the last few years, in my opinion. But we'll get to that later. I remember during the McGuinty years of the Liberals, there was a big push on encouraging students to go into the skilled trades through colleges and apprenticeship programs and whatnot. And I'm wondering why is it that we're always playing catch up on this file? Like we keep hearing it's important. It's important. It's the way, what we need to make Ontario great again. Part of my euphemism. But yet we never seem to meet that what we need. I'm wondering why are we always playing catch up on this?
Well, I'll look at it from 2 perspectives. So one is I'd give the present government and even the federal government an A+ on promotion of the skilled trades. Even the previous Liberal government, they were doing well moving into the latter part of their term in promoting the skilled trades. That's a passive approach to a problem-solving situation. So it's great that they're saying that you should go into the skilled trades, this, that, and everything, but there are more substantive initiatives that a government can implement in order to actually solve the problem. And even the present Conservative government, because most of the responsibility for skilled trades lies at the provincial level, but they've just danced around the edges. And most governments historically have just danced around the edges. They utilize wage subsidies as probably the bulk of their responses to solving the skills gap. I can tell you that a wage subsidy only goes so far. You give that wage subsidy to an employer, they'll hire an apprentice for the period of time that money's there. Once that money's dried up, they'll let that person go. For any number of reasons, they'll say that the work is dried up, and any number of reasons or excuses from my perspective. The other thing is that governments seem to focus all of their attention on the unionized world. If we look across the workplace landscape, employment landscape, roughly about 70% is non-organized or non-union. 30% is unionized. You invariably see either it's Minister O'Regan or former Minister McNaughton standing in front of a union hall. I'm a unionist. I appreciate the value of a union, but you're not going to solve a problem if you're only addressing 30% of the problem. And that's what governments inherently do. Because from a political perspective, it solves some of their problems. The other challenge is, and especially in construction as it relates to housing, most of the landscape is not an organized landscape. It's small to medium-sized business owners who don't have an HR department, who don't have the capacity or the knowledge to take on an apprentice and then follow them through to through their journey to becoming a journey person. So there's any number of solutions that could be implemented that would target the largest part of the pie, and governments just don't do it.
So for example, what kind of things do you think we need to see which would address specifically the small and medium-sized business owners, and helping them to take on additional staff or to train additional staff?
Well, so my former employer, and before they were my former employer, they were my former client. Support Ontario Youth, we have basically, from my perspective, solved a number of those issues. So what Support Ontario Youth does is they use a triage policy or target or mechanism. So if someone is interested in a skilled trade, they'll go onto the Support Ontario Youth website. They'll fill out a skills assessment. And what that will do is, and it's tried and true, it's been utilized in other countries around the world, the technology, it will identify if they are suited to the skilled trade and what particular trade they're best suited for. This helps an employer, especially a small employer, because quite often it's the case that someone will say, or their parents will, chide them into. So a young person goes into a particular skilled trade, not suited for it. So what this triage process does is it identifies the best skills necessary in order to go forward in a particular trade. That's important. So on the front end of it. And then what it does is Support Ontario Youth actually holds the RTA, which is a registered training agreement. That's the first step in going through an apprenticeship. So we hold that, or Support Ontario Youth holds that RTA, which allows for mobility. So at the same time, we've already assessed our employers and we've identified the best apprentice for a particular employer. So we match them and they'll go in there. If we've mismatched them, then because we hold the RTA, if that employer identifies to us that they don't like that particular apprentice, we'll take that apprentice back, find them a different placement, and we'll sub in a different apprentice that's better suited to that employer. That's one. Because we're holding the RTA, we will follow, because there's extensive requirements for a journey person or an employer to identify the skill sets for the apprentices that are there. So we call them competencies. So that process is laborious often for someone who is, because many of these employers from small to medium-sized businesses are still on the tools. And in other words, they're still part of the work environment. They're not just supervising, they're actually getting their hands dirty. So you work a 8 to 10 to 12-hour day. You go home and you try and manage your business as you might expect. It can be taxing. So we take on those roles of the identification of the skill sets in conversation with the employer, the recording of them, and the transferring of that information to the ministry level. And then at the same time, we will provide wage subsidies or wage top-ups for the apprentice when they go into school. We provide mentors for both the employer and the apprentice, which is necessary. So we'll mentor the employers to say how to grow the business, how to manage the apprentices that they have in future, so on and so forth. If we have access to wage subsidies, we'll actually provide those wage subsidies to an employer, so on and so forth.
So I guess just, I mean, I run a small business, very different field, not in this kind of field, but certainly we've had summer students and things like this over the years, which were funded by federal grants actually, but it doesn't. And yeah, I mean, it's a massive amount of work, even a simple project, and for good reason, because the government shouldn't be just throwing money at people without some kind of checks and balances and application forms and all the rest of it. But still, it's if you're a small business and you're, like you say, you're actually the boss is still the person who's doing a bunch of the work, of the actual work, so to speak. It's really impractical very often to, I mean, I can certainly say, again, very different field, but I can certainly say it has put me off applying for money. The thought of, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do all this admin. I'm going to have to do, I don't have time to do this. I'm trying to earn a living, so yeah, it seems from what you're saying that the Help Ontario Youth is doing that kind of thing, taking the burden off the business, and just making the process simpler. Is there? I mean, I guess another side to this is why, given that skilled trades, are really these are good jobs. These are jobs that should pay well. They're skilled. These are jobs which often they're not going to go away. You're not going to be sort of many skilled trades are, to an extent, kind of, immune from economic upturns and downturns. I'm thinking of sort of plumbing or electricians or things like this. Why aren't they more attractive to people? Why is it that we have a sort of struggle to actually get people to want to do these jobs?
Well, I think it's a whole host of things, and I'll even look at myself. So I have two sons, 11 years apart, but when they were both in high school, they were high-performing academic students. So in the 90s, so they did well in school. They did well in math, particularly. They did well in English. Those are two of the traits that you need in virtually all of the skilled trades. But we as parents, we look at, I guess, the post-secondary work journey for most of our kids in this sort of fashion. So top to bottom, we look at university first, college second, and the trades, well down the list in third, and well down from there. But if we turn that on the side, we actually should be looking at our post-secondary education for our kids on a level playing field. You can choose any one of the three. So we look upon those as parents in a lesser light. So the skilled trades, we look upon them as a lesser light, or we imagine that you need to be less educated in order to go in there, or if you're having a problem in math or English, maybe that's where you go. I'll give you a perfect example. I'm teaching tech at the high school level in the late 80s. Guidance counselor comes down and says, Betty here, she's not very good in math and she's not very good in English. Craig, can you teach her to be a trade? Give her a trade. I'll say, well, in my mind, I'm saying exactly what I enunciated to you, that everyone's looking at it from a lesser light, including this academic person that's trying to find a path for the students. But you know what? I'll take the student on. Maybe they've got a learning disability. Maybe they don't quite translate the academic or the in-school portion to a practical environment. So we'll see what we can do. But in all likelihood, if they're not very good at math and not very good at English, they're not going to do well in a trade. So that's one of the things, is there's a stigma attached to the skilled trades. Secondly, starting in the mid to late 80s, I guess the traditional shops vanished from the high school environment. We went to what I call the pretty shops, where you would simulate some of the tasks that you would do in the skilled trade. You got rid of the auto shop, you got rid of the electrical shop, and so on and so forth. So we, at least in Ontario and probably across the world other than Europe, we got rid of those things. So those are two of the reasons.
I wanted, on that note, I kind of want to bring it to the modern era. And one of the big things that Doug Ford and Stephen Lecce have been selling is you can leave high school at grade 11 if you want to go into to pursue an apprenticeship. I personally, I view this as has all fraughts of problems that I think will be evident down the road. But I kind of see where you're talking about that stigma of the skilled trades of because you don't do well at school. Well, then we're just going to put you into a skilled. You're just going to go be a plumber or a carpenter or electrician. Like it's a lesser career option. And I'm wondering, this policy of just getting kids out of high school faster to put them into skilled trades. What does the industry think of that? How do you view that? Does it harm? Does it help? Is it a good policy, or is it just we're going to have bigger problems down the road for these kids who are going into something to make a quick buck? I would assume.
So terrible policy. However, the responses from the industry are mixed, and my sense is, because I had some ideas as to why it was implemented. First off, historically, there was a program similar to this implemented in the late 80s. It was woefully poorly adopted. There was, I think, in the program across the province, maybe 100 and 110 kids that actually went that route. because I think most of the those situations back then, the parents identified that they didn't want their kid going off at an early age into it because of safety reasons, because of any number of reasons. They probably felt they weren't prepared. From my perspective, when I saw it, I said, "Oh God!" So this is deja vu, number one, and number two, it's a terrible. So the government and other governments have always said, well, it's a great venue or a great avenue to go is for work life, to go into a trade. And we're talking about the importance of the trades and so on and so forth. And now we're undermining it to say that you don't have to have your maths and you don't have to have your Englishes, and you can go out into the workforce. I think it was pandering to some of the Ford government union friends. Nothing against the unions going after labor, but I think it was just to find easy labor for many of these people. So invariably, my bet is that most of those people that might avail themselves of this particular program, they'll just be laborers their whole life. They won't necessarily, unless they do have some smarts, they won't necessarily follow through and become a journey person. So it's just finding labor, easy and simple labor.
It strikes me as kind of backwards because I'm not a tradesperson. I'm not a journeyman, so I'm kind of giving my opinion of what I'm viewing from the outside in. But I've always figured a kid who graduates from high school, goes to college to pursue an apprenticeship in whatever field that they want, gets the skills. The idea is, okay, I'm going to go out, get hired by a company, or figure out how to make a go of this, figure out kind of what is like practically to do the job. And then maybe in 5 or 10 years, I'm going to branch off, going to form my own company. I'm going to take a loan. I'm going to become an electrician for hire because I see all these homes being built. And I say, you know what? I'm going to get a cut of that pie. I'm going to form my company. I'm going to go in and do the work or do the fix it jobs that need to be done. And to me, that's what I would do. Like looking back, if I had to redo it all, if I had to redo it like 10, 20 years ago, maybe I would pursue that line of work. And I guess it kind of comes back to the branding problem in my mind is that, are we equipping kids to be able to make those choices? Say, because running a business is a lot different than just being a tradesperson. There's a lot, like, you do need that math. You need to be able to understand the contracts and all that you're getting into, while at the same time you have a passion for plumbing, carpentry, electrical work, whatever the case may be. And are we just setting ourselves up for a bigger problem down the road where we don't allow?
Yes. Yeah, we are, without a doubt. To your point, that's what I would tell you. And again, that's one of the reasons why those organizations like Support Ontario Youth exist, because often outside of the time that it takes them, if you're still on the tools as an employer to manage your business, if you don't have the math and you don't have the English level, then you're relying on other people in order to run those aspects of your business. It might be your spouse, it might be a lawyer, it might be additional costs because you've had to hire any number of individuals in business. So yeah, it's a real challenge, and it's just not going to get there, right? We are setting ourselves up for failure ultimately.
What are we facing in the near and long term, Craig, in your opinion, if we don't figure a way to get? Let me back this up. How do we get the skilled people that we need now to start building these homes if we're already behind the curve on this? If we have this gap, how do we fill it now so that we can start building the homes that we need to solve the crisis? Because we've heard our federal and provincial politicians talk about opening land up, development. We're going to make sure municipalities open up the pipeline to all these permits to get done to build the homes and rental accommodations that we need. And that's all well and good. But you're telling me like we're just going to have empty lands because there's nobody there to build it. How do we get it done now as opposed to waiting 4 or 5 years down the road?
Well, I don't think that it's going to be solved quickly or easily, to be quite honest. which means that none of the targets that the governments at any level are putting out will be met. That's the reality. Again, you're not going to overnight solve the lack of 1 million jobs by any number of policies. Now, one of the ways that governments have chosen is to give a higher rating for immigrants coming in that might have a skilled trade. Or once they're in here, targeting them or directing them towards a skilled trade. But immigration alone will not solve those problems overnight. So again, you have to implement a program that might be similar to Europe. So trade schools in combination with what we're doing at the high school level. So that might be part of it. And again, implementing programming that helps small to medium-sized businesses to actually accelerate and take on apprentices. Again, moving the dial from 2 apprentices per journey person retiring to 3 or 4. We'll get to that point eventually, but it's not going to come quickly or easily. I'll give you another. I was in discussion about 1.5 to 2 years ago with a pretty large Ottawa builder. So they weren't a developer, they were a developer builder. And that's different than developers. Developers, many of them don't actually build. They just, it's speculation for lack of a better term, or maybe simply put. But builder. So 10 years ago, even during a crisis, even during a skills gap that existed back then, post-permitting, it took him approximately 8 months to build a house. The crisis has accelerated. So now we're at the point where we are right now. It now takes that builder 22 months to build a home. Huge gap. So you have additional costs as far as their carrying costs for their construction loans, et cetera, et cetera. The task of maybe trying out an apprentice and not having them, or finding other journey persons, or just simply the cost of labor. With scarcity, obviously, you can charge higher for your work done. So we're not going to solve it quickly or easily, but at the same time, they've got to implement. Everyone's got to work together. And Joel, you would know, and so would you, Roland, that often governments think about issues in a silo. So if it's simply put, a ministerial, let's say a labor issue, they'll leave it all up to labor. But labor is both the colleges, it's the high schools, it's the Ministry of Labor, it's the Minister of College and Training. So outside of the college program, the training aspect of that particular file, it's a taxation issue. Any number of issues along the way. So they have to go outside, or you have to get a number of ministers working in concert and in collaboration actually to solve these problems. Government, and I understand why they do it. It's a 500 channel world. They're getting inundated with information quite often, again, because they've targeted unions as being their solution. They're only getting an opinion from a big builder like Ellis Don or someone along those lines, and big unions. So they're getting their I guess solutions from those two entities without going really deep and going to the small business owner and again asking them what they want, or those associations like the Ontario Electrical League that organizes electrical contractors, small to medium-sized electrical contractors, and there are others as well that do it. And then governments have to look outside of what you think is easily identifiable. So in order to build a house, I'm going to look at the electrical trades, the plumbing trades, the HVAC trades, and so on and so forth, carpentry, my own particular trade. But what we seem to not look closely enough, in order for all that equipment to, I guess, be provided or be serviced, you have to now look at the automotive sector. You have to look at the millwright and the machining sector. So rarely do you ever see, a minister of labor or someone from government look at those in the same way or in the same number of opportunities to the electrical or the carpentry or so on and so forth. So it's a host of problems that have to be solved all at the same time. And I don't think the government has the capacity or the inclination actually to do it. So in that way, we're not going to see it happen unless homes go to a modular construction method. But even then, that's still not going to solve the problem. So I'm normally the guy that's pretty optimistic. But on the housing file, well, you'll see it, Joel, on in Twitter, I'll say you can't do this without that. It's just simply put. No matter how many academics try and solve these problems, it's just not going to happen. The great ideas I've seen Dr. Moffat, I've seen Jennifer keys, Matt. Promote different policy initiatives that, at first blush or at face value, they seem like they're issues or their regulations or their whatever that can solve the problem. But again, if you ignore the labor side of it, it's never going to get done. So that's why I'm a little bit pessimistic.
When we're talking, this is another side of the housing issue, which really takes up a huge amount of what we talk about on this podcast. And certainly, as we said at the outset, this is a side that no one's really talking about. When you look at particularly right now, the opposition at a federal level, who they blame when they talk about why houses aren't being built, but also really the key focus insofar as not just sort of opening up lands for their buddies, in terms of the kind of ideological aim of the Ford government, it's been to reduce what they would term as red tape or get the municipalities out of the way, put pressure on the municipalities to speed up the process. And my point, my hobby horse for years now has been, I don't see that it's actually the municipalities that are the problem. Everything gets appealed, everything goes through this whole process. Municipalities can't really stop anything very much. And they can't really slow things down very much. Things tend to get appealed before the municipalities even get out of bed in the morning. But I'm thinking of just developments that I know of, around my end of the 905. Where I can think of them going. I remember them going through the council process. I remember them going through the appeals process. I remember all of that, and then that was over, and that was 5 years ago. And maybe that development is being built now, or maybe it's still waiting to be built. I guess, I don't know why it isn't built, whether the developer's just sitting there and waiting, or whether it's things like the skilled trades that they're waiting to get the labor so that they can actually do the job. Is that, in your experience, the kind of thing that is actually holding up developments for long periods right now?
I think it's the biggest bulk of the problem, to be quite honest. Down my way, so the Niagara region, you'll often see the little signs, those signs on the H frames at the side of a road, looking for labor, right, and looking for skilled labor. I can tell you that even companies. So there's a mechanic that just got a contract, I think last year, down the Niagara region to do their portion of the build for about 3,000 or 4,000 homes. They're hiring people off the street at $40 an hour. They're still not meeting the numbers that they need, even at those elevated rates, right? Because that's unheard of, that you would hire someone $40 over $40 an hour off the street in order to try and fill your labor gap. Again, to my point, there's a builder who now has gone from 8 months to 22 months, or actually 19, I think it is, to actually build a home. Just trying to find labor is near impossible. I know that my older son, who owns his own company, it's a small company. He's always looking for labor because there's a cycle through, right? Someone's always looking for a brighter new job or whatever, and they might move on. My younger son works for a company with a pretty large number of employees, but he's always looking for people. It's a cycle, you're cycling through. People are always looking for more, and I always like to look at the skilled trades from a realistic perspective. Yes, it's a great avenue for labor, for work. But at the same time, it's not easy. Many of these trades are physically demanding. I have tendonitis every year because I was slugging a 26-ounce hammer. I was a relatively small guy, and I had to pound a 3-inch or 3.5-inch spike with a couple of hits. That's not easy when you're, not a big person. So from a physical nature, if you're smart in the skilled trades, you'll look to get off the tools as, at some point down the line. And to Joel's earlier point, to go into business for yourself, so you can supervise, maybe do a little bit of labor, but for the most part, not be slugging your tools or getting carpal tunnel or whatever else, working the tools all day and then working the business. So Yeah, I would imagine that it's much of it. And I think that people in general don't understand the jurisdictional responsibilities. So I think that probably if you ask most academics, they would say most of the responsibility for housing lies at the provincial level. So if they don't fulfill their role, then you're behind the eight ball. Then you've got the municipalities, to your point, that have a responsibility, but it's less than 60%. Some might argue 20 to 30%, and the rest is federal. And the federal responsibility is, in general, unless they come to an agreement with the municipality or a provincial government, theirs is the tax side of the issue, right? So, and we've seen some moves made by the federal government right now that looks promising, and it's basically tax issues, right? So, trying to get all those together. I guess it's, but again, that's an even bigger can of worms, and one that you might want to devote a podcast down the line to. But revisiting the Constitution and division of powers, right?
I mean, the more we look at it, as I say, to extent, this podcast has had a number of themes, probably 2 or 3 themes that have dominated a huge number of our episodes ultimately. And something, I never thought that the housing was a simple issue, but my goodness, it's so much more complicated than I ever imagined. And yet, what we see when politicians are talking about it is still so superficial ultimately.
Yeah.
And hammering our way at these kind of tropes, really, of, well, the municipalities are stopping it. We need to just keep on hitting the municipalities with a stick until they build things, as if a municipality can build anything until a developer comes to them and asks to build it. It's so kind of depressing. Coming back to that stigma issue, I think it's something we're all very aware of, that we have not and do not. I mean, we want to get our children to go to university. We want to get them to the best job they can, which often is going to be, it's, like you say, not a physically demanding job. It's an indoor job in an office. It requires 3 years at university at least. How do we start to counter that stigma and say, hey, these are really good jobs that you're kind of just not even considering as a possible career?
Well, I think, again, we have to be realistic to say that it is an avenue, and it's an avenue for a particular type of person, right? So it's not for everyone. So we have to, again, as I said, one of the things that Support Ontario Youth does is they triage, so they find the right person for the right fit. So that's important. I guess more exposure to the skilled trades. Maybe a little bit jokingly, every year up until this year, I've gone to one of my former clients, the Ontario Electrical League, that again represents small to medium-sized electrical contractors across the province. I go to their golf tournament at Glen Abbey. So have someone who's thinking about the kids going into the skilled trades drive through that parking lot sometime when they're at that golf course and see the number of Ferraris, the $100,000 cars and trucks that are in that parking lot. Those are people that are doing well, right? So although money is not the only, criteria for success, it's certainly one of the criteria for success. You have to also enjoy what you're doing. But exposure is important, not only for the young people, but for their parents to see exactly what most of the skilled trades entail. Perhaps as a society, we have to value those things. So one of those things that we overlook. So even these are all peripheral to actually solving the skilled trades. There is a need for cooks. I apprenticed as a young person in 2 trades. I followed through with carpentry, but I was apprenticing as a cook or as a chef, right, in the culinary arts. We need cooks. A lot of these restaurants, some of the restaurants have closed because there's any number of reasons why it happens. One of them was the pandemic, and then they couldn't pivot to actually provide a takeout solution to their restaurants, so they may have lost it there. The other thing is that, and I say this, there are 2 things that I guess a great majority of people want to do. One is build their own home. Don't do it if you don't know what you're doing it. That's one. Or number two is own a bar restaurant. Don't do either one unless you know what you're doing.
So I can vouch for that latter one.
yeah. It's tough. It's tough work, right? It's a subsistence living, right? Unless you structure your restaurant properly. Again, I come from restaurants too, right? So, I've done a lot of things in my life, but
you built your own home too, and it wasn't side note. It wasn't an average home, was it?
No, it was a straw bale home, and in actual fact, I went through a lien with that home as well. And so here's someone who actually. So when I worked in construction, I started off as a laborer, went on, got an apprenticeship, became a carpenter, journey person. Then, because they identified that I had architecture in my background, I became a white hat. So I did materials estimates and scheduling. So here's someone that understands everything around the construction, building a home or building a structure. I still went through a lien. And those can be time consuming. Took me easily 5 to 7 years to solve that lien. And not to the person who liened me or to me, it wasn't in either one of our favors. It's sort of shaved down the middle as far as the solution goes, but I paid more than what I should have. And they got less than what they wanted. But all of those different things, it's so back to my original point is we need cooks in order to feed these people that are out working during the day. So whether it's the truck that comes by in order to feed them. So we need those people. Again, to a point that I made earlier, we need mechanics in order to service the heavy equipment that's needed in order to do this. But again, broadening, again, we have a tendency to think in silos. So not only government does that, but we as individuals do that. But look at all of these different things in a particularly different light, and maybe elevate the job itself. So most of the people in the service industry, in Europe, it's a trade. It's not a trade here. So around the world, they look upon these things that maybe we don't look on as a trade, but as a trade.
It's one of those things kind of coming out of the pandemic. We reflected and said how it kind of upset that cultural notion that we all had of kind of the hierarchy of people, and we realized how much the people supposedly at the bottom of the ladder were important. The tradesperson, the as you said, the cooks, all those people that we initially kind of said, okay, that's you're kind of lower on the rung. We realized, oh my gosh, they're so important just for the basic functioning of society. And I thought, okay, maybe we're going to kind of see like a bit of a reshaping of how we look on that, and that hasn't really happened. I keep hearing one of the things we've heard regarding the housing crisis is that it needs to be kind of a wartime footing to approach it. And as you're talking, Craig, that kind of came back in the back of my head, in that if we remember our history, and Roland, you probably remember this as a historian, during the Second World War, the average Joe front person, the person on the front line, was hailed as a hero. They were the one getting the job done, and the country was there to support them to fight fascism. And I'm like, why don't we have that same attitude of that towards the tradesperson, that you're going to solve this crisis? It's not the banker, it's not the politician, it's not the counselor around the council table, it's the tradesperson who's actually going to build our way out of the crisis. And I know it's potentially a very simplistic solution, but I'm thinking in terms of branding to encourage people to say, I want to get into this. Is that a way to kind of reapproach this problem? If our politicians put that campaign of the hero of the housing crisis is the journeyman, the tradesperson, the electrician, the carpenter, the plumber, the
mechanic, the heavy duty mechanic,
all those people. And we're also going to, we're talking, this is an asterisk, but we've had on the podcast Flavio Volpe of the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, and he's talking about how the auto industry is shifting from the traditional internal combustion engine to the electric car. And we've always said, well, what happens to those people who are busy building carburetors and exhaust systems and all that stuff? Those are highly skilled people. Just all those shops that are used to building those internal combustion engines, that's a wealth of resources that we can encapsulate. Say, come on and start building how the parts we need for the housing. I'm not saying it's the solution, but it's just one of those. If we start going down that path of we champion these people as the heroes of the housing crisis, we've got a 10-year fight ahead of us against this monster of our own creation. Could this just be a way of just like let's start doing it, and we're gonna put the focus on the person on the ground putting the nail into the wall.
So with Support Ontario Youth, I had proposed to our ad folks that maybe we take on an approach similar to what happens. So as parents, if our kids go off to university or they graduate high school, or they graduate university, we'll put an ad in the newspaper that says my son just graduated or my daughter just graduated from the U of T at this and so on. So we're so proud, blah, blah, blah. Well, why shouldn't we as parents be saying, my son just achieved his journey person status in electrical or carpentry or so on and so forth. So you could start with an ad, an ad by something along those lines. So just put the, that ad with, celebrating your kid's success in the skilled trades. We're so close to the U.S. that we always take U.S. examples, but Uncle Sam wants you, right? We could do a person in the skilled trades or the arm of the woman dealing with the airplane parts in the U.S.
Rosie
during the
Riveter.
Yeah, Rosie the Riveter. Government could take on all those. Again, outside of just saying it's a great thing to go into, put some money into something that will be striking. So maybe something simple. But the other thing is that governments have a tendency to do these show and tell. So the Minister McNaughton implemented something similar to what we were doing in the skills and the trades. We did tools in the trades boot camps. People that are going to go into a skilled trades, they want a hands-on experience. Show and tell doesn't cut it for most of these kids. I can take them to a trade show and it gives them nice little things. I can tell you that being an educator over the years, taking my kids to these show and tell type environments or experiences. Most of my kids didn't go into a skilled trade. I could identify the ones that would go into it. And all they did was they used that as an outing, get away from school and so on and so forth. So take on approaches that are actually going to, mimic the experience in the skilled trades. Mm-hmm. Take on a different approach with advertising. Identify the importance of labor to solving the housing crisis, as you just pointed out. There's a ton of solutions. Roland, you come from this world as well. That you could probably envision any number of ad campaigns that would maybe move the dial a little bit more in the favor of solving the crisis, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really. I think it's something I've been aware of for a long time. Is that I can talk about a story, and this is back before I emigrated to Canada. Basically, the same problem existing in Britain, and a colleague who was a professor, the head of department where I was, he was proud that his son was not going to go to university, but was going to become a tradesperson, because it's like, well, he's going to earn more than I earn as a head of department. They're going to have now he had tenure, but most academics did not have tenure. He's going to have a job for life because plumbing isn't going away. I don't know if it was plumbing. It was something one of those jobs.
The heavier trades.
Which one it was. Yeah. It's like those jobs don't ever go away, because even if there's a house, even if housing isn't happening, there's still a hell of a lot of people who are going to need maintenance done. And it was actually he kind of changed it. Yeah, we think, far too many parents think, well, if my child goes down that route, that's a failure. That's the third, like you said at the start, that's the third option. You go to university, you go to college, you go into a trade. And that's completely wrong for so many reasons. And there are so many jobs that require a university education that aren't actually particularly good jobs and aren't going to make you particularly happy or wealthy or give you job security or guarantee that you'll still have that job in 30 years time, because it might, things change and might go away. And I think, a sort of fundamental rethink, which has to come from a government level of just educating the public to, don't think of these things as three equal options. Like you said, you put it really well right at the outset. Think of these as three equal options that all offer excellent routes to a good career. But yeah, I mean, it's a global problem to an extent that we have this cultural bias towards getting your child to university. And then, I went to university for far too long, so it's a bit rich for me to say that that's wrong. But it is wrong that it's considered so much if you don't do that, then you're somehow falling short.
Let me try and address your points, and they may be tangential, but I think they're related that sort of address your point. So I started out in architecture. In the fourth year, I dropped out in order to see the practical side of what I was doing theoretically. So I went on, became a carpenter. Having the carpentry made me a better architect, and vice versa, right? They enhanced both aspects of it. Late 1800s or early 1900s, often the route to become an architect was through a trade. So you became a tradesperson first, and then you became an architect. So maybe integrating these programs that actually touch on both the university side and the trade side might sort of acquiesce some of the reservations that some parents have. Maybe that's a solution. I can tell you also with Support Ontario Youth, quite often the people that were going to come out to a Tools in the Trades boot camp, they were coming out because their partner or their parent saw an advertisement, on CHCH or one of the other TV stations, or heard it on the radio in one of our ads about this opportunity to try and get into the skilled trades. So government targeting these towards the parents, towards the spouses, the partners, to try and get them interested in actually suggesting to their responsibilities, their familial responsibilities. Why don't you go into this particular skilled trades? So yeah, I think that the government could put a fair amount of investment into some of that advertising, and maybe even more than just a simple ad. I think that we've got to, maybe the government could be supporting some articles or a series of articles in the newspaper. So the Sunday columns that follow week by week by week, to try and get people through, whether it's digital or whether it's the paper. I'm still old school. I like to have the newspaper in my hand, but I look at digital as well. But they could do all of those things, or promoting those organizations that actually are turning the dial. Because one of the points that I didn't mention is we always talk about trying to get the person in there, but you need the supports in order to maintain retention rates. So unions do a very, very good job of training their apprentices and keeping them in an apprenticeship, because they do all the different levels of support. So Support Ontario Youth, actually, we tailored our model of delivery on the service side to the unionized model. So it's a unionized model for those people that are non-union. That was our original intent. At this point, Support Ontario Youth still works with unions in order to try and get people in the skilled trades. But unions have traditionally about an 88 to 92% retention rate, which is important. It's not only those people that are going into the trades. More important is retaining them on through their journey persons. Support Ontario Youth has a 90%, 97% retention rate, so even higher than the unions. So we have to look at the problem again from a number of different angles. So not only entry into it, but retention, not only looking at an apprenticeship, not only looking at an apprentice, but also looking at the employer side of it, looking at the tax side, looking at the labor mobility side, all of these different things. One of the companies that we work with, Blue Branch, deals with labor mobility, right? Bringing labor from those areas where there is high unemployment and people need jobs to areas where they can't find work. So they'll move them across the country. They did it historically in Alberta, bringing people from the east to the west, but now they do it in Ontario. So they take people from one area where they have higher unemployment to an area where they have the need for that labor. So again, looking at it from all different aspects, targeting parents, targeting maybe government, initiating some broad advertising, and maybe some some more journalistic approach to actually educating people about the skilled trades.
It sounds definitely like we're going to have to. It's not a simple, quick, easy campaign to fix this void. So, which is kind of the theme that we've heard about the solution to the housing crisis. No matter where we turn, it's never a quick, easy. Oh, that's the simple fix to solving this particular aspect of the crisis. So, I'd say our time is coming up on the episode. So, Craig, I want to thank you for coming on to talk about this not talked about side of the housing crisis. We thank you very much for your time to come on and shed a little light on what's needed to be done to get nails into the wall and pipes into the homes and all that needed stuff.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I would have pointed in on an architectural approach that might help as well, but that's maybe for another day. We'll see.
Well, that sounds be a great conversation.
Maybe that's a part 2.
Time. Yeah, part 2.
Maybe part 2, yeah. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully some folks maybe are educated a bit, or maybe they'll go to a Support Ontario Youth website again. They're no longer my employer. I've retired and enjoying as much as I can life, but find an opportunity. And Support Ontario Youth is not the only organization that'll provide you a route to a journey person status in a particular trade. So
fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we'll talk to you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
All right.
Great. Take care.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.